And I'm pleased to welcome everyone on behalf of the Archivists of the United States, the National Archives, and the National Archives Foundation. We are the private partner to the National Archives based in Washington, D.C. I also want to welcome all of our online viewers. We want to see you be very active, so please forward your questions and comments as the program goes on. The national conversation you're about to participate in is part of a larger initiative of the National Archives called Amending America. It was launched earlier this year in conjunction with the 225th anniversary of the Bill of Rights. You all have that on your calendar. It's in December of this year, so mark that down now. The Amending America initiative includes a major exhibit in Washington, D.C. at the home of the National Archives, a traveling exhibition, educational materials for classrooms and libraries, as well as a ton of online resources. But one of the flagship elements are the national conversations. It's a 6-city series where we're going to be looking at rights and justice issues. We're going to explore immigration, education access, LGBTQ issues, women and gender issues, and of course civil rights here in Atlanta. None of this would be possible without the support of a small army of staff at the National Archives, especially the Education and Public Programs team, and at the Carter Library. Their team was fantastic. And I want to thank all of my team from the National Archives Foundation for their contribution. In addition to the staff's blood, sweat, and tears, this couldn't happen without financial support. We're especially thankful for our lead sponsor, AT&T, as well as the Ford Foundation and Seedlings Foundation.
Thank you all for having me. I guess I would be remiss if I didn't quote Nina Simone, who is one of the ancestors who I get a lot of inspiration from. She said, your art should reflect the times that you're living in until there's a time that we could actually reflect the times that we would like to see. So with that being said, we're going to pay tribute to the ancestor as well. Beautiful. It's called Misunderstood.
Don't let me be misunderstood.
Oh no, no, no.
Misunderstood.
Don't let me be misunderstood.
Don't let me be misunderstood.
Check it. Lights out, but the baby's hungry. Stressed up to here, they're dependent on me. I'm trying to be friendly, but my burden's lonely. I put my faith in God, depend on Him only. Have grace on my family and homies. I got horsepower, I can't run with these ponies. How sweet the sound, sour to phonies. Feeling like Lazarus amidst these zombies. Compared to wading pools, I'm like 2 tsunamis. I was made in His image, the presence is on me. No fear, I'm like a one-man army. I got a bulletproof spirit, cause the favor is on me. We got a black president, yes, his name is Barack. But if my freedom got the cost, y'all can give me a box. I'd rather walk it out with God. Call me Enoch, cause change is gonna come till my walk is done. So I shine in the name of the one. But don't let me be misunderstood. Don't let me be misunderstood. Don't let me be misunderstood. Peace. Thank you.
It is a pleasure to be here. My name is Dr. Maurice Hobson. My day job is that I am an assistant professor of African American Studies and historian. I'm delighted to be here, and I was thankful when Dr. Evans asked me to come through because I have the unique disposition of 2 things. First and foremost is I actually study the city of Atlanta, and what I write about the city of Atlanta is not always favorable in terms of how it is seen. But the second thing is I grew up in Selma, Alabama. My principal in high school was the Reverend Dr. F.D. Reese. Jean Jackson was my 6th grade social studies teacher. The wife of Bob Mance, Joanne Mance, was my 7th grade social studies teacher. And so the conversation around civil and human rights is something that is near and dear to my heart as a result of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 coming out of Birmingham, where I went to college, and then the Voting Rights Act of 1965 coming out of my hometown. It is a pleasure for me to moderate this panel today. I'm sure it will be spirited. Of course, it is entitled Taking a Stand, Activism Today. And before I introduce the panel, I think we should set the stage for some different things. There are numerous ways in which scholars engage the ideas of civil and human rights. And one of the ways in which we do this is that we must challenge frameworks, or what historians call historiographies. And so oftentimes the way in which civil and human rights has been presented is often this male charismatic leader. And we must challenge a lot of these notions. And so I want to share some things with you all in terms of how we should challenge these ideas, and then how we should challenge the agency, or how we should look at agency in terms of how we fight oppression. The first thing that we must challenge is the periodization of civil and human rights. So oftentimes, as Bayard Rustin termed the phase, the classical phase, we often think that civil rights starts in 1954 with Brown v. Board of Education, and then it ends in either 1965 with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, or with the assassination of Dr. King and the Fair Housing Act. The truth of the matter is that it extends well before, and it is still a major issue today. And so as a result of that, I mean, I can give you numerous examples of it extending before 1954. I mean, the Dred Scott decision in 1857 is a conversation around citizenship. Elks v. Wilkins, Smith v. Allwright in 1944, Morgan versus Virginia. We can even look at some of the things that have gone past 1968, particularly the Selby Haitian Centers Council in 1993. And so all of these are conversations around civil and human rights. We also must engage the idea that these struggles are not just local struggles or national struggles, but are international struggles. And so when we see this, have this understanding of struggle, we need to understand that it is actually global. The third thing that we must really challenge in terms of this is challenging that male charismatic middle class leader, and really focusing and looking at more organic grassroots organizing and how things should take place. So as a result of this, examples of this would be here in Atlanta, Dorothy Bolden, who created the National Domestic Women's Union, which is now the National Domestic Women's Alliance, that created uniform policies for domestic workers in the city. Or champions such as Fannie Lou Hamer, who was merely sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so we must challenge those ideas. And as a result of this, we must push the boundaries of how we understand civil and human rights. We must understand that there are numerous issues that are taking place that fall into the category of civil and human rights. We certainly have conversations around citizenship and access in terms of gender equality, in terms of workman compensation, in terms of the LGBTQ community, in terms of immigration, and all other aspects of things. So the first question that I would like to ask the panel, and feel free to answer when you feel led to answer, is what do you think are the major issues in civil and human rights in today's society?
It's a pleasure to be here. I do want to add that I want to challenge this notion of civil and human rights. I think that distinction is a disservice. Civil rights is only one pillar of the human rights framework. They also include political rights. They include economic rights and justice. They include social rights and cultural rights, right? This includes our right to education, the right to food and water, the right to join unions, the right to speak our own language. These are human rights. And civil rights is just one part of it. So I think
it's not just about surviving, as Emiko pointed to, but also thriving. In a country today where over 40% of workers make under $15 an hour, I think that's a huge, huge organizing point for civil rights movements today is the living wage, increasing the living wage for all workers.
So the question that I have to the panel in terms of civic participation, how can we combat racist policies, sexist policies, atrocities on gendered bodies in terms of policies and different components, in terms of using our ideas and passions to do so. How can we do that? How can we challenge legislation?
But 2 weeks ago, undocumented students stormed the Board of Regents before they had their meeting and took over the seats of the board. And they held their own hearing on policy 416 and 434, which banned them from higher education and in-state tuition. They held their own hearing. They called up state senators, undocumented students, and learned about the facts, right? No, they don't have the power to vote, but because they do build power amongst themselves, they can participate. They can demand power from these politicians who are ignoring them, right? But we have 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country who are denied the right to vote. But at the same time, citizenship will not save any of us. That's right. It did not protect blacks from lynching after they got citizenship. It did not protect Latinos from being deported in the 1930s, even if they were American citizens. It did not protect Japanese Americans who were citizens from being interned, right? So it has to be beyond citizenship, it has to be beyond voting. It is power, it is participation, it is holding people accountable. So, you know.
We're now in the era of social media. And recently at Georgia State University, we had a conference called Du Bois in the 21st Century, looking at William Edward Burghardt Du Bois, the famous scholar that called America out in terms of race and set the stage for a lot of different things to kind of take place. And one of the things we discussed is, what would W.E.B. Du Bois do if he had social media? Like, what would his hashtags be? Like, how many fights would he get into in a week? And so,
World star.
right. But I want to ask the question, what are the strategies, particularly in terms of movements from generations to generations? What are some of the new strategies that we see?
You can't just say there's a movement and then expect people to really understand what, people might participate, they might jump in the crowd, but they don't really know, if they don't know what they're marching for or they're, shouting for, then what's the point, right? So how can we also educate people about, processes, because I think a lot of times people don't engage because they don't know how, right? So how do we engage people in terms of the educational process as well? I think it's equally important. And using social media as a means to do that, I think is a great.
One of the reasons I sit here as a professor is I am the biggest Outkast and Goody Mob fan in the world. And I'm serious. And so in listening to the music, what I began to understand is, the music was great, but it was actually telling a story about what I call the Olympification of Atlanta, how the city was franchised for world consumption, but how it disfranchised, criminalized, and demonized the black indigenous. And as a result of that, one of the things that I've been able to do is to actually put the data to the music to really kind of talk about the ways in which people have been marginalized, disfranchised, particularly in a city too busy to hate or the Black Mecca. And so we work against that. And so I've been considered to be the intellectual arm of the Dirty South. But I want to ask this question because all of us on this panel, we work in terms of activism and agency. And Brother Fahamu, I know that you have done serious work in terms of visual arts, or Professor Soltis, she would want me to call her doctor, so Professor Soltis.
I'm a commoner and I like it. So.
I know that you have done significant work in terms of educating undocumented young people. Ms. Freshour, I know that you've done serious work in terms of representing, labor movements and particularly looking at gender work. Can you go through the process as to how you create the product and what it means for the people? Because it is a fine-tuned product, and how it's presented and how you capture those narratives.
Well, I guess I'll start. I usually end, whenever I give a talk, I usually end with this quote. In the future, historians will tell what happened. Artists will tell how it felt. And that's how I approach, any work that I do, any of my projects. I think about it in the sense of it being a record of where we are, who we And so, many of my projects, really began by asking a series of questions. And my work ultimately presents a series of questions. It's about engaging in invoking, inspiring dialogues.
What role can artists play in human rights? And we've talked about it, but let's get deep. Let's get like my man Abyss. Let's go as deep as we possibly can to kind of look at the ways in which artists can create curriculum. And I want to interject this. One of the age-old issues within African American history is the conversation about with art as propaganda. So, should art be created to promote the race, or should art be created for art's sake? And I think that there is a good space for both areas. But in turn, there is trouble in the land, and we need all hands on deck. And so the question again is, what role can artists play in human rights?
I think, to Carrie's point about the Black Panther Party, one of the greatest things that they did was to take control of the visual culture around the party and begin to create publications, begin to create a visual media campaign around the movement that reflected the ideals that they wanted to put out into the world, as opposed to having someone else dictate to the world what they look like. I think we see that in a lot of the Black arts movements throughout history, that Black artists have taken the initiative to use their art, to use their creativity, to use their performance and their writings or whatever it may be to tell their story, as opposed to waiting on somebody else to tell it for them.
People of different races and genders, sexualities have become caricaturized in popular media. Do you believe the increase in representation of these groups in popular media help aid the general population better understand these struggles? And this goes back to the conversation around representation.
I'm going to get the number wrong. A really alarming statistic recently that actually makes my throat close up a little bit, which is something like 56% of white millennials think that they face racism. I don't even really know how to respond to that. And it's their perception and it's valid, but I think that might actually be the result of increased exposure to Blacks and Latinos and people of color in social media, is that when you are used to privilege, the assertion of humanity from people who are underneath your feet can feel like oppression, but it's not, right? When people gain human rights, you don't lose anything. Right? So, and so I think education among white youth is really important too, and especially highlighting historical figures of white anti-racists is very important. Looking at Pete Seeger, looking at Howard Zinn, that white people have stood up against racism. To have role models for young white youth, I think is very important too. Otherwise, this perception that they are facing discrimination and oppression, it's troubling.
What's the biggest change you would like to see in American rights in the next 5 years?
You would hit us with a question like that last.
Yep, you would.
And ask us to answer it briefly. The notion of engagement. And I think, what I would like to see is people take the initiative to educate themselves and to get more engaged in the various processes as it relates to human rights, as it relates to politics. I hear a lot of people express frustration with the political process, particularly as we are in a election season, looking at presidential candidates, and every 20 minutes somebody changes the rules on how things works, and and everybody's kind of throwing their hands up like it doesn't matter anyway. It actually does matter when you make it matter. Right?
I think that for me in the work that I've been doing, most people turn to the poultry because it's the highest paying job and it pays every week. And compared to fast food work, compared to service, retail, work at Walmart, it's the best job based on the salary. So if we were able to increase the minimum wage nationwide, I think that people would have more rights in low-wage work and work that is overly exploited, like in the poultry plants.
I actually wrote a haiku.
Uh-oh.
Not just because I'm Japanese, but I was inspired. I would like to see for race not to determine who lives and who dies.
Y'all give it up for every panelist up here. They all had ideas. And it makes my spirit feel full. It makes me know that this is God making the hole in one for me. You know what I'm saying? I was supposed to be here. Like, I was supposed to be here. Thank you again, Mr. Chisholm as well. So, Mrs. Server. So, Sherrod, give me, we're going to do a gunpowder. What's it in the air? Okay. What's that in the air? Gunpowder. It's like they really don't care about us. I said, what's that in the air? Gunpowder. It's like they really don't care about us. It's like the powers that be done lost their grip, and you're not above the law. Karma wants her kids. Break out the riot gear, they pumping a black fist. We done woke a sleeping giant. They madder than hey. What's that in the air? Gunpowder. It's like they really don't care about us. They kill our sons before they get a chance to shine. Kill our dreams so we can't expand our minds. Taught me out English, pulling on a Newport. It used to be sky's the limit, now life's too short. Most of this is self-inflicted excuses. People addicted to this chicken. Yes, I wish I ate fish more. What's that in the air? Gunpowder. I hear you quiet.
That concludes our program. The museum is open. We have a fabulous exhibit called The Continual Struggle. That's charcoal etchings of the movement. Our panelists will hang around for a few minutes. I want to take this time to thank the Archives Foundation, my colleagues at NARA, and especially my staff. Khalil Chisholm, our education specialist. Danielle, who is our volunteer coordinator. Steve Olson, Tony Clark, my deputy, David Stanhope. We're here for Atlanta. This is going on month 6 for me. So if you thought this was great, imagine what's coming next. So just thank you for coming.